Hello. So, last night I appeared on Piers Morgan's show to discuss Israel's continuing murderous assault on Gaza. They have been asking me for a while to come on. I very rudely ignored them. Basically, if I'm honest, I'm aware that I'm something of a cultural prop amongst some of Piers's audience. And the last thing I want to do is anything which turns Israel's mass slaughter in Gaza into some sort of culture war. It is too important than that. It's a matter of life and death on a truly horrendous mass scale. Now, the reason I eventually said yes is because, to be honest, whatever feelings you or I might have about Piers, things he said and done, I have been impressed by the platforming of unequivocally pro-Palestinian voices on his show, including, of course, Palestinians themselves, who need to be heard from the most right now. Now, you may consider this a damning indictment of the rest of the media, not unreasonably, but his platform, I think, has helped the cause of the Palestinian people. It's been a net benefit. That's my own view. He's a tough interviewer. We're both maybe reasonably accused of liking the sounds of our own voices. But anyway, you can see the whole thing on his Piers Morgan Uncensored channel. But here's a couple of clips. Firstly, Piers has referred to Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine as genocide. So I wanted to talk about this and the question of consistency.
Look, what's happened here is babies right now are gasping for breath and suffocating. We've had several nurses and patients shot dead. In fact, this whole hospital has been described by medical staff as a mortuary.
But you don't know.
Just quickly, when a hospital becomes a mass grave, when dozens of decomposing bodies have to be buried in a mass grave in a hospital, we're talking what you said. Can I just quote something you said about Putin? And I think this was very wise. You said, in March 2022, I'm seeing a genocidal monster killing women and babies in maternity hospitals as we sit back and let him do it. Why was it so disgraceful? But you were right. You were right to be emotional.
Here's the difference.
Why when you see this hospital, is there not the same fury?
Let me explain. Because the two are, in my opinion, morally very different. In one case, Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, he was committing war crimes, having illegally invaded wait a second, let me finish. Having invaded a sovereign democratic country. Here, it was Israel that was invaded by a vast number of terrorists who murdered over 1,500 innocent men, women, children. They kidnapped 240 people, including babies, children, Holocaust survivors. So my point is, morally, there is a massive difference.
Hold on.
Morally, it's a massive difference. Now, the question of the hospital... Wait a sec. The question of the hospitals is this to me. They have so far produced some evidence of Hamas operating inside the hospital. For me, so far, as a journalist trying to be fair and impartial, I don't think, as you've heard me say to Mark Regev, I don't think I've seen enough evidence here which says to me this was a sprawling Hamas command centre. But there is a moral difference between what Putin's doing in Ukraine and what Israel's doing to defend itself against Hamas, isn't there?
Hold on.
Isn't there?
No, no, sorry, this is the difference, OK, if you want to talk about that or trying to separate them. For a Ukrainian ordinary civilian being killed or for an ordinary Palestinian child being killed.
Both equally awful.
None of them did anything wrong. No. We agree on that, don't we?
Yes, we do.
We absolutely agree on that.
Yes, we do.
Now, when you repeatedly denounced Putin for his genocidal behaviour in Ukraine, do you stand by that? Do you think that's a genocide?
Absolutely.
Well, it doesn't matter what the basis for what the operation...
Of course it does.
No.
It does.
No, Piers, in terms of what actually is happening, we can talk about the massacre, the obscene massacre of 1,000...
What Israel's doing is not genocide.
Piers.
You can't keep saying
let's talk about genocide. Let's talk about genocide. Yeah. Why is it?
Let me tell you the difference between genocide. Let me put something to you, and you come back at me and tell me if I'm wrong. Hamas, from its charter onwards, and from the spokesman said last week, is dedicated to the eradication of Israel and killing as many Jews as it can possibly kill. That is the purest definition of genocide intent that you will ever see. And they executed it on October the 7th as best they could. Now, what Israel's doing in responance, and they've been very firm about this, and the international courts will rule as they...
These are very long questions.
They're not. I'm answering a point, and I'm putting one to you, right? In my estimation, they are qualitatively different. What Hamas is...
Can I answer?
Publicly, what it's doing is genocide. What Israel's doing is not genocide.
There's a difference between... Israel, you could say both Israel and Hamas have engaged in genocidal and murderous rhetoric.
No.
And I'll give you an example. They have.
No, you can't.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
No,
I can. Is it uncensored or not?
Yes.
You can say
Let
me quote what the the Israeli authorities have said.
Go on.
Benjamin Netanyahu, when he quoted Amalek, the scriptures, what does Amalek say? He quotes Amalek when they attacked the Israelites. And what God told the Israelites to do was to kill every man, woman, child, and livestock. If I would put it to you, an Islamist leader was quoting a similarly genocidal passage from the Quran, you would not, I would say, hesitate.
Can I respond?
We haven't but you've had a lot.
Respond to that
I'm
point.
going to respond just quickly. Israeli officials said that Gaza will end up being a city of tents with no building standing. That they are attacking for damage, not for accuracy. The agricultural minister, Avi Dikti, he said we are rolling out a new Nakba. A Nakba is the mass expulsion, 700,000 Palestinians in 1948. This is why hundreds of genocide scholars, people who are actually, unlike you and I, experts in the field of genocide studies, fear that a genocide is taking place. So the difference between Israel and Hamas is Hamas does not have the capacity to wipe out Israel. Israel is wiping Gaza off the map.
I really do think this is an important point here about consistency and hypocrisy. Piers thinks what's happening in Ukraine is genocide, but not Gaza. How does that make sense? So we spoke about it some more.
Israel could, if they wanted to, kill everyone in Gaza. They decided not to do that.
Is your definition,
genocide is where you want to kill everyone.
Sorry. Your definition of genocide, because in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin hasn't killed every last Ukrainian. That's simply not happened. No, he hasn't. And nor has he stated his intention to do so, and nor as brutal and barbaric.
Vladimir Putin, absolutely, by illegally invading a sovereign country and indiscriminately bombing anything in front of him.
Indiscriminately bombing?
Is waging a form of genocide.
Wow. Indiscriminate bombing. Gaza, more than 2 Hiroshima bombs worth have been dropped on East London in the space of 5 weeks.
Okay, let me ask you two
questions. No, you said Ukraine. No, I'm going to have to put this to you.
Okay.
15,000 people have now been killed now by the Israelis, estimate, in Gaza. 1 in every 200 people in Gaza have now been killed. If you were to adjust for population in Ukraine, that would be 300,000 Ukrainian civilians. 300,000, there's been a terrible death toll. It's estimated by the UN, 10,000 civilians have been killed since February last year. In the space of 5 weeks, a country with a much, much smaller population has had a much higher, has had a death toll higher officially than that in Ukraine. So how can it be?
I'm going to answer.
How can it be that you call that genocide, but when you have nearly half the entire civilian death toll of the Bosnian War in a country which is twice the size in terms of population, why isn't that genocide, Piers?
Well, I've just answered your question by saying if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they would simply
So would Russia.
They would vaporize.
So would Russia. They would nuke Ukraine.
Russia wants to take over Ukraine.
Yes, and they want to take over Gaza.
And it will kill any number of Ukrainians, men, women, and children in that process.
The death rate.
That it's able to.
The death rate in Gaza is much higher.
The only reason it hasn't is that actually Ukraine has a large military supported by countries like the United States and is putting up one hell of a fight.
Russia has nuclear weapons.
Okay. And by the way, Ukraine gave theirs up.
Russia has an armed force.
Let me ask you.
What? No, you've got to accept this.
Hang on. No. I've got to accept everything.
A far lower death rate in Ukraine.
I've explained why. I've explained why.
You haven't explained why.
Yes, I have. Well, let me explain
Israel
again.
have made it clear.
You didn't hear me.
Israel have made it clear that they intend to occupy Gaza permanently.
Yeah, which they should not be allowed to do.
And what did
we can agree on that.
What did the Israeli ministry leaked intelligence? What did the intelligence ministry
it's my interview of you.
I know, but
not your interview of me.
Well, just an error on my own part there. I misspoke. I meant to say that pre-war Bosnia had twice the population of pre-war Gaza. It's actually, I'm afraid, worse than what I actually said. 40,000 Bosnian civilians died during the 3-year Bosnian War. And I have to say, that war in the 90s, when I was obviously very young, hungover current events is really one of the great horrors of our time. Now, that death toll actually includes several thousand Bosnian Serb civilians. The most apt comparison there, in this case, would be with Israeli civilians. So the proportion of civilians killed in Gaza after 5.5 weeks is conceivably about half the proportion of civilians killed in Bosnia after 3 years. And bear in mind, the US and Israeli private estimates suggest it's actually considerably higher. We don't know how many have been killed in Gaza. It's now impossible to know what the death toll is. On Putin, what Piers said isn't accurate. Putin's own view of Ukrainians is that they are basically, along with Belarusians, Russians in denial, and therefore should be part of a greater Russia under Moscow's domination, of course. Israel's view of Palestinians is obviously not that they are Israelis in denial. Israel's leaders are very clear. many of them certainly, that they would simply prefer Palestinians not to be there. They don't consider them a people, certainly not on land they have decided belongs to a greater Israel. Now, yes, in the way that senior Israeli politicians have repeatedly claimed there was no such thing as the Palestinian people, Putin has claimed that the idea of a Ukrainian nation is a fiction. He blames the Bolsheviks basically for inventing Ukraine. It's just an absurdity. And now you could argue that murderously Russianizing Ukrainians is genocidal. The point is we have an Israeli state which uses genocidal rhetoric, as I went into, which is slaughtering a much higher rate of civilians than we saw in Bosnia, than we've seen in Ukraine. Although, and it's important to say this, I quoted UN statistics on Ukraine, they are likely to underplay significantly the number of civilians killed in Ukraine, that 300,000 Ukrainian civilians have not been killed in this hideous war Putin has launched. Nobody has made any such claim. It's also significantly higher than Syria. It's estimated around 300,000 Syrian civilians have been killed since 2011, which is the equivalent of 30,000 Palestinian civilians in Gaza. So again, about half the proportion of Palestinian civilians have been killed in 5.5 weeks as Syrian civilians in a 12-year war. Look, I know this is macabre, making these sorts of comparisons, but we do need to understand the sheer horror, the scale of what's actually happening in Gaza right now. Now, we also know there are open plans to ethnically cleanse Gaza amongst senior politicians in Israel to seize its land. And in the West Bank, we're seeing huge numbers of illegal settlements, of course, ethnic cleansing, murderously so, and an open desire from senior Israeli politicians to annex the lot, thereby permanently scrubbing the Palestinian people and nation out of existence. So there we go. Again, the question: why is it genocide in Ukraine but not genocide in Palestine? The life of a Ukrainian and Palestinian should not be considered any different. Anyway, I'd love your thoughts. Do watch the whole interview on Piers's channel. Do share this video and that video to get the message out. Please like and subscribe as ever. Keep the show on the road on patreon.com/OwenJones84. We have a lot of content on this horrific, horrible massacre, and I'll try and elevate the voices we need to hear. I'll speak to you soon.